Hello and welcome back to On the Spot. I'm Christopher Taylor of My Astro Chris, and you're back on the spot with me. This week we have a 43-year-old male that I'll be looking at as far as his chart goes. And this is a Leo sun, but we won't be talking about that Leo sun, but I just wanted to mention that relative to other configurations that I will be looking at this time around. So anyway, here's his natal chart right here, so have a look. And what we're going to focus in on are a few pieces of this chart. And so you can see those circled right there. And that is Saturn down in the second house, okay, in Aries. And then we have Mercury over in the sixth house, that's in Cancer. And we have Venus in Virgo up in the seventh house. So it's that configuration. They're all kind of in this zone of 12 to 15 degrees or so of those signs. And so that's a zone that I want to talk about because the planets Jupiter and Saturn are currently transiting and hitting that zone of the zodiac, those degrees of the zodiac from other signs. Okay? There's also a Mercury retrograde coming up here in April that we'll talk about, and that's going to have some influence here in this arena. Okay, so that's something that we'll also talk about. So, as far as that configuration goes, in general, we would say that Leos have this inner self that wants to express, and they're usually quite, unabashed about putting themselves first in certain situations. With this case, though, however, we have Venus in Virgo, we also have Mercury in Cancer. So this right away, and we also have Saturn in Aries, we can throw it all together like that, and they all kind of connect to each other, okay? And so there's a flow of energy, in some cases discordant flow of energy, and all of these kind of add up to someone who, first of all, is going to be a little bit softer than the average Leo. Also someone who's going to have a little bit more issue with sticking up for themselves and putting themselves out there, where most Leos can do that pretty easily. All right, and there's kind of this over-accommodation that we can see here as well, with Venus in the seventh house and a whole bunch of other things going on that we won't get into. But in any case, the basics that we can pull out of this is a life lesson of learning how to speak one's own voice. In other words, learning how to, first of all, value the self. That's the Saturn in the second house lesson of a lifetime. Value the self enough to speak one's own truth, and that's that Saturn squaring Mercury over in the sixth house. And there's also what's called a quincux from Saturn up into Venus in the seventh house, and I have one of these in my chart too. And this goes back to one of the the same idea of self-devaluation, always having to prove you're worthy, prove that you're worth something, have something to show for it before you could feel like you're deserving of life itself in some ways. And so when it comes to relationships or anything that has kind of this reward component to it, people with these kind of configurations will tend to delay their own rewards. It's a self-denial thing that goes back to a sense of being not worthy enough for it yet. So this is an internal struggle, it's a lifelong struggle, but right now is one of those time periods where it's coming into play. These things are, these lifelong lessons and struggles they come and go, okay? And this is one of those times where it's coming, where it's under review, all right? And so the beginning of this general time period started back in the fall. So today it's March 8th, 2011, and we can go back to about late October of 2010. So just about 5 months ago or so, 4 or 5 months ago. This is when Saturn, you can see up there in the top of the chart, Saturn is in his 8th house. And when Saturn's in the 8th house, this is a time of getting rid of old habits, getting rid of old self-talk, old self-defeating habits. So for sure that what we just talked about before, what I summarized there, of the issues of not valuing the self high enough to speak one's truth and questioning what this person thinks inside of themselves and whether it's right or wrong. Those are the kind of things under review right now, and it's an opportunity period to get rid of old self-talk, to get rid of what has held this person back for so long. And so that's the Saturn component in the 8th house. While it's up there in the 8th house, what it's doing is it's opposing his natal Saturn. This is a very important time period in a person's life relative to the Saturn lesson, in this case the self-worth lesson. And at the same time, it is also forming aspects to Venus as well as to Mercury. Okay, it's squaring Mercury. It's kind of reforming the general energies that he has in his chart natally with the Saturn square Mercury and it's forming what's called a semi-sextile to Venus. And so this is highlighting this whole area of self-worth, this whole area of speaking one's truth and being okay with believing that what one feels is true for the self and that that is valuable in and of itself. That is what this is about. So, life experiences that could be going on right now, because again, this started about October of 2010. The Saturn component will last all the way until the end of the summer of 2011, so around August or September of 2011. And that it's kind of holding the space so that this general year period of late October 2010 through about September 2011 is a time of getting in touch with this lesson, with this life lesson of standing up for oneself, speaking one's truth, and valuing the self without having to be valued by others or through others or validated in any way. Okay, so that's what the intent of this general period is. There is an activation period coming up for this as well, coming up real soon. Okay, and this activation period is roughly from the time period of late or mid to late March through about mid to late April. So here it is again, March 8th, 2011, and we're keeping up here in a couple of weeks. He'll be entering into this kind of hot zone, this kind of trigger zone for this energy. All right. And so mid to late March through mid to late April, like we said. And so what's happening there is Jupiter, down on the bottom of the chart, Jupiter is going to be forming aspects to these same planets, but from the other side of the chart. Essentially, Jupiter and Saturn are going to be opposing each other for the final time here in late March. And so this opposition is going to have special significance to this individual in that it will highlight a sense of growing self-worth and having to get rid of an old sense of self-worth. That's at Saturn in the 8th house, getting rid of the old, and Jupiter in the 2nd house, growing and expanding the new sense of worth. That's what's going on. But it's a battle, it's a tug of war on the inside for this individual. And but at the same time, so it's almost like that whole component of himself has a chance to go through, and that's a key term, go through instead of around the idea of low self-worth or of devaluing the self in any kind of way. So life experiences here in mid to late March, right through mid to late April, could be wide and varied. However, it is almost definitely going to really push those buttons in him related to his self-worth, related to how he holds himself back, and kind of being fully conscious and aware that now is a time, to do it differently. Now is the time to take different steps, okay? Now is the time to accept that job offer, potentially, that I would have rejected before because I wasn't good enough, but now I take it, and I take it on. That's the kind of things that will happen around here. And so this time period is a very big and significant time period for decision making as well, because we also have Mercury retrograde, which will start around March 30th through about April 23rd or so. And so that general time period, Mercury retrograde is also going to be kind of flirting around, especially with his natal Mercury. And so it's going to be squaring his natal Mercury this whole time. And this really does signify major decision-making period, okay? It's a major decision-making period. Essentially, this person is going to probably be offered something in the next few weeks here. Something that is going to push those buttons to say, oh, am I good enough to do this? Am I good enough to take this on? Am I worthy enough to deserve this? Those kinds of questions will come up. And then it's going to be a period of weeks into mid to late April that finally a decision can be made that says, okay, here's how I'm going to handle this. You know, maybe what comes is too much for now, and that's okay. But it's understanding what to take and what to leave, and to not judge the self too harshly with what you have to leave at this point. But it could be an opportunity time to take a lot more in than would be typical for this individual. So, like I said, the major time period here, or I should say, the major issue here is self-worth, is speaking one's truth, is being okay with one's own truth, being validated without outside validation. That's the life lesson. The time period of a general sense of dealing with this is roughly October 2010 through September 2011. And there's a trigger point here with Jupiter hitting these planets, as well as a Mercury retrograde here in the mid to late portion of March, right through the mid to late portion of April. So essentially when the Sun is in Aries this year, for the most part, this is going to be a pretty intense time, pretty intense decision-making time for this individual, but it's an opportunity to value the self higher than he's valued himself before. And that's the important thing to take out of this lesson. So that about wraps it up. Again, I'm Christopher Taylor of My Astro Chris. If you want your own on-the-spot reading, you can contact me through my website at myastrochris.com. And of course, I also give full-length, comprehensive consultations for people in person in the Sacramento area, as well as on the phone or through Skype. Anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, really can work out as far as that goes. And I do relationship readings, I do individual readings, I do organizational readings. So whatever floats your boat, let me know. Again, myastrochris.com. I'm Christopher Taylor signing off. Thanks a lot.